Erev Tov. Hello, everybody. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. Good evening to those of you in Israel. Good afternoon or good morning to those of you in North America. It's great to welcome, as usual, a multinational audience to our Zoom events. Those of you who are regulars will know that we routinely discuss contemporary issues in Israel and the Jewish world, and also historical issues. Today, we have a sort of special event for the upcoming Pesach holiday. We're going to be talking about one of the great Haggadot that are still available to see, to buy these copies of. And also the artist behind the Haggadah, Arthur Szyk. And we have two incredibly highly qualified guests to talk about the Haggadah and about Szyk as well. So we're going to have a conversation and presentations from our two guests, and then we'll get questions from you, our audience. You can write those questions in to the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You'll see that at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So write those in. You can write the questions as they come up, and I'll get to them after our presentations. So let me first just tell you a little bit about our guests. We are honored to have with us Irvin Ungar, who's the world's foremost expert on the art of Arthur Szyk. He's a former pulpit rabbi. Today, he's the CEO and founder of Historicana, which is a publisher of rare books and historic Judaica. He has curated numerous Szyk exhibitions in institutions all around the world, including in the New York Historical Society, the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the Library of Congress. He's actually going to be running an exhibition in the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, for those of you who are based in New York, later this year. So we can also ask him about that as well. He's the author of the National Jewish Book Award winner of 2017, Arthur Szyk, Soldier in Art, and also Justice Illuminated the Art of Arthur Szyk. His most recent book, Arthur Szyk, Preserved Institutional Collections of Original Art, was published in 2023. And later this year, he's going to be publishing My Life with Arthur Szyk. So we look forward to seeing that. He's also, he served as the curator of the Arthur Szyk Society and its traveling exhibition program. And he lectures and speaks about Szyk on university campuses and museums all around the world. With that in mind, I want to tell those of you who are based in Israel or who might be visiting Israel, and particularly those of you in the Jerusalem area, that we will be hosting a special exhibition of Arthur Szyk's work, opening here at the Begin Center on Sunday, 4th of May. We have an official opening on that evening, and we'll be very honored to have Irvin Ungar with us in person. I've just written in the chat, if you look at the chat box, I've posted a link to the to register for that opening, so you can click on that link. You could do it now and open the page on your screen and then go to it a little bit later, but that will allow you to pre-register for the event. You can also just show up on the night, but you might want to pre-register to be sure that you'll get entry to this. This is on the 4th of May, and on the 5th of May we're going to have a gallery tour, a walking tour with Irvin Ungar. So all the information is there on our website, so please do check that out, and you can see hopefully if you don't yet know enough about Arthur Szyk, then this evening's webinar will whet your appetite for that exhibition. Our second speaker and our second special guest, we're extremely fortunate to have with us alongside Irvin Ungar, Professor Shalom Sabar, who is a lecturer in the Department of Jewish and Comparative Folklore and Art History at Hebrew University here in Jerusalem. His areas of research include Jewish art and folk art and rituals and customs in the Jewish communities in Europe and the Middle East. He's published over 200 books and articles in these fields. He lectures and guides tours to Jewish sites in Europe, North Africa, India, and Central Asia. So we're going to hear from Professor Shalom Sabar a little bit later. First, we're going to start with Irvin Ungar, who's joining us from his home in California. Irvin, great to have you with us.
Pleased to be here.
Okay, so I know you have a presentation for us. Before we get to that, I want to, on the assumption that not everyone on the Zoom will know that much about Arthur Szyk, can you just give us a few minutes worth of explanation? Who was Arthur Szyk? Why is he such a consequential artist for us as Jews and as Zionists?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and welcome everyone. First, some key dates to keep in mind. So to contextualize Szyk's life, he was born 1894 in Lodz, Poland. The second of the three dates is that in 1940, he immigrated to the United States from England, where he was living for 3 years. It was during that period of 3 years in England where he supervised the printing of his Haggadah. Szyk was very, very well known in Poland, in France, in England before he immigrated to the United States, and celebrated and decorated by France and Poland with awards, medals, honors for his artwork on behalf of humanity. He arrived in New York in 1940. It went on to become the leading anti-Nazi artist in America during World War II. Those who know his Haggadah and know his Jewish artworks of the Book of Ruth, Job, Esther, and so on may not have known that Szyk was extremely well known for his political art. He arrived in America in 1940. He lived in New York City, then moved to New Canaan, Connecticut. He died in 1951, so well over 70 years ago. Arthur Szyk died. I would also submit, and another lecture would be needed to detail this, but Arthur Szyk probably was the single most artist who created art toward helping to advance the creation of the state of Israel through his art, and his art supported all the many numerous organizations, advocacy groups to support the creation of Jewish state. Others in Israel may know him, and Shalom once told me that this may have been hanging in every Jewish home in Israel. Szyk also illuminated the proclamation of the establishment of the state of Israel. And I remember once during my visit, Shalom said, Irv, this was everywhere in Israel. So that is sort of the dates, the framework for Arthur Szyk, and we're going to fill in the gaps as we speak, particularly with reference to his Haggadah.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get to that. Let's talk about his Haggadah. I believe you have some pictures for us. It would be a shame for us to be talking about Arthur Szyk's art and not be able to use the screen share function on the Zoom.
Fantastic.
Okay.
And let me just go right here. And I want to start.
You go down, play from start. There you go.
There we are. Okay. Yeah, the history on the creation of the Haggadah itself. From 1934, in 1933, the year Hitler came to power, Arthur Szyk was invited by the United States government to actually come to America for 7 months to exhibit his works on freedom, particularly at the Library of Congress. He was here for 7 months. He was decorated by the United States, given the George Washington Bicentennial Medal. In 1934, he returned back to Poland, to Lodz, place of his birth, and that is when he began to illuminate the Haggadah. So from 1934 to 1936, he created all of the original artwork, the art as well as the calligraphy. He was both the artist and the scribe for his Haggadah, with the 48 miniature paintings, very small, smaller than a sheet of paper. He took these works on paper with him to London. In 1937, he arrived there, and over the next 3 years, he supervised the printing of the Haggadah. In 1940, it was published by the Beaconsfield Press, that were Jews from Lvov, not Lodz, not Łódź, where he was from, but from Lvov, and Jews in England. They formed the Beaconsfield Press, and they published in 1940 the first printing of the Haggadah, 250 copies. All of them were printed on vellum, on parchment. Quite often, an illuminator might do his work on parchment, and then it's printed on paper. Here, Szyk did his work on paper. It was printed on vellum, on parchment. This is the binding of the 1940 edition. The next printing of the Haggadah historically is Szyk was then when this was published, 1940, he had arrived in America. The translator and commentator for him on this Haggadah was the famed Oxford scholar Cecil Roth. Szyk arrived in America in 1940. His life was here. He died in 1951, as I mentioned. In 1956, it was printed for the first time as a popular trade edition in Israel. Many people have copies of these. It had velvet covers on the left. It had metal covers, not silver plate, just metal covers on the right. Variations of this metal cover appeared, variations of blue velvet, red velvet, accompanied 10,000 copies were printed in 1956, another 10,000 in 1957, an extraordinary number of first printing of a book. And then this book continued to be reprinted into the early 2000s. I became particularly interested in Szyk's Haggadah and set out to print an entirely new edition of the Haggadah, where I commissioned a different translation and commentary by Rabbi Byron Sherwin in Chicago. I created as a luxury edition in a premiere and deluxe edition with a companion volume. The companion volume was called Freedom Illuminated, Understanding the Szyk Haggadah, to which Professor Shalom Sabar wrote a very, very important article where he analyzed every single work in the Haggadah itself. So his essay appears in that volume. This was the luxury edition, premiere and deluxe, and then in 2000, that was in 2008. This was published, and then in 2011, it was printed as a popular trade edition by Abrams Books in New York, which is accessible easily on Amazon if you can arrive at it. That is the history of its creation. That is the history of its printing.
And could you, excuse me, as we can see here from the, for those not so familiar with Szyk, they can now get a sense of the style of his art just from the front cover that you have here. But it's not just that it's sort of beautifully colored and that the art has his distinctive style, but also that there are themes in the Haggadah which speak to Szyk's own passions and convictions, right?
Exactly. And what I'd like to share then with the audience, Paul, as you know, is I'd like to explicate one page in the Haggadah. Professor Sabar, I know, will also be comparing Arthur Szyk's art to other Haggadot and the influences of them on his art. I'd like to take a moment to just explain in detail one work of art and then highlight the many themes that Szyk has in his Haggadah and maybe show you one or two works of art in here that particularly emphasize those themes.
Sure.
Two of the major themes, even before I begin to show you the first piece, are that Szyk saw in his Haggadah the Nazis as the new Egyptians, that he realized that Hitler was the new Pharaoh who had come to annihilate his people. And keep in mind, it's 1934 to 36. That Hitler was the new Pharaoh, and there are symbols in the Haggadah that point to this. I'll show them. The second major theme in his Haggadah is heroism, and that, together with a few other themes, I will highlight in a moment. But the first introductory page to the Haggadah is worthy of note. By the way, for those of you who have the popular trade editions of the Haggadah, the blue velvet, the metal cover, this page is not in your Haggadah. It is only in the vellum edition, and then I restored it, and it's in the editions which I published. And you'll see why it was omitted when it was published in Israel in 1956 for the first time. They didn't include it as I make my case for this. This is the dedication page to King George of England, George VI, who became King of England in December of 1936. This is when Arthur Szyk was finishing all the original artwork in Poland before he went off to London. And you may not be able to see it, but I don't know if you can see my cursor moving here or not. Can you see that, Paul, moving?
Yeah.
Okay. Right here happens to be a G and the Roman numeral 6 below it. In any case, why would Arthur Szyk dedicate the Haggadah to George VI? Two reasons. A, he was going off to London to have his Haggadah printed, makes sense, dedicated to the king. The second reason may be because England at that time in 1936, 37 was was the leading nation in the free world that would be standing up to fascism, to Nazism, fighting against the Nazis. Makes sense then to dedicate this to England. Remember, America is not in a war for 5 more years, so America certainly is out of the picture then. Turns Szyk's back. How does Szyk dedicate the page? He says, "At the feet of your most gracious majesty, I humbly lay the works of my hands, shewing forth the afflictions of my people Israel." You may not see some of the letters because they're part of the illumination there, but this is Szyk's presentation to the king. He signs it, Arthur Szyk, Illuminator of Poland. But there's a problem with dedicating this book to the king and to England. And what is the problem? The problem is this is a book about freedom. And at this particular moment in time in 1936, the British had already passed at least 2 white papers that restricted the flow of immigration of Jews out of Europe into the land of Israel. So how is Szyk going to dedicate the great book of freedom to the king and to the people who are restricting their freedom and their movement? And here is how Szyk handles this both intellectually and emotionally by, at the very bottom of this work of art, what you will see there is on the far right, European Jews who are in need of the exodus from Egypt. Remember, this is a book about the exodus of the ancient Israelites, but for Szyk, it's about the exodus of modern Jews. And on the far left, on this dedication page, in the gates, the entrance of Jerusalem, he has painted the words Zion, Zion, Jews who would like to leave Europe, arrive in the land of Israel. And in the middle, what does he paint here on this body of water? This is not a passenger ship. I have this looked at by British military experts, naval vessels. This happens to be a British military ship that Szyk painted between preventing the Jews from leaving Europe and entering into the land of Israel. This was on the dedication page to King George. It was the first copy was presented to the king. He responded to Szyk and the Beaconsfield Press, saying he loved this book. He's going to show it to everyone, because I have a letter from the librarian. Whether the king ever noticed this or not, we don't know. But for Arthur Szyk, what is important here, while the Haggadah is a religious book, for Szyk, it was also a political book. It was about right or wrong. It was about justice. It was what his people needed, required, and what he firmly believed. This is an introduction to his Haggadah, appearing on the dedication page, not appearing in the popular trade editions. I guess in 1956, still, people did not feel favorably towards perhaps England. Therefore, it was omitted. Again, it's been restored in the edition. But it's a fundamental part of Szyk's Haggadah, his narrative, his belief. Shall I move on to the themes now, Paul, or do you?
Sure. Yeah. I wanted to just say one thing that you mentioned about obviously how Szyk did this move of representing the Nazis as the present day, or the new iteration, the most recent iteration of the Egyptians. And it's interesting because, of course, he's doing this, you say, in the 1930s. So Hitler's come to power, but this is before the war starts. This is before the final solution. And what's interesting is that in his, and this is at a time when many Jews in Europe are still very much in denial about what Hitler actually means for the Jews of Europe. And what it brings to mind for me, of course, is, especially as I work here at the Begin Center, is that one of the great sort of people, heralds of what was to happen, one of the people warning the Jews of Europe during this time was, of course, Ze'ev Jabotinsky. And it's not a coincidence, I think, that he was a friend of Szyk's, right?
That's absolutely right. Also, Menachem Begin had visited Arthur Szyk in Connecticut in the late 1940s, I think when Begin's first visit to America, or I think at that time, whether it was first, I'm not sure, but I think it was, but he visited Szyk, so he knew Begin, but Jabotinsky and him were very close friends. When Szyk was living in Paris in the for a dozen years, in 1921 to 32, 33, Jabotinsky would visit and bring him news of Szyk's mother back in Lodz. Mr. and Mrs. Jabotinsky got together with Szyk and his wife. Jabotinsky certainly had an influence, I believe, on one of Szyk's major works of art, Trumpeldor Tel Chai, which became the modern Maccabees. His maybe moving to England was influenced by Jabotinsky as well, who was there. So yes, there was a very close tie. And if Szyk had a mentor, it would have been Jabotinsky. So thank you for mentioning.
Very interesting. Okay, so please do take us through some of the other themes.
These are the themes very quickly that I want to go through because I want to make sure there's enough time for Professor Sabar to really enlighten us. It's so important. The Nazis as the new Egyptians, heroism as victimhood, anti-Semitism, Moses and David, an important theme of his Haggadah, Zionism, four sons, and dedication pages. It looks like a lot, but we're going to zip through these too. First of all, the Nazis as the new Egyptians. This is a sketch, does not appear in the Haggadah, where Szyk is showing Hitler as the new pharaoh, and next to him is Hermann Göring, dressed in garb. This does not appear in the Haggadah, but was a side sketch. So here's a direct relationship, correlation. If we don't feel it, don't see it in the Haggadah, here we have it. The idea that Szyk painted swastikas on the Egyptians and on snakes in the Haggadah has been verified. I don't have time to go through the process on how that was done, but I'm going to show you a picture of it and you'll see. Here, for example, in Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. You see it's hard to see the blonde hair and blue eyes that the Egyptian taskmaster has in the upper right. But the rondel, where the blue arrow is pointing, that round rondel on his chest, Szyk had initially painted swastikas there. They were painted over prior to publication, but under layers of paint through lighting at the United States Holocaust Museum, we were able to see the swastikas as he painted them also on the armbands of Hitler sitting of the pharaoh sitting here. Here you see that image on the far right. I hope you can see, somehow it's coming through on the screen there. Yeah. There's a swastika here blown up underneath this, which we saw under layers of paint. Indeed, he painted swastikas. Why they were painted over had a lot to do probably with those who were sponsoring his publication before he moved to England. And then when he got there, may have been uncomfortable. Remember, he's painting swastikas in Lodz, Germany, Lodz, Poland. Germany's right over the border. And here he is creating this. And in 1935, the Nuremberg laws have already been passed. Szyk is in the middle of that, and he's fighting back through the means. This is one of the aspects of the Nazis as the new Egyptians. Hitler as the new pharaoh. Another instance happens to be in the Four Questions of Manishana. There's a snake up here in the upper right. In your Haggadah, you will not see swastikas on the snake. They were painted over. However, this piece of paper here was printed in 1935 to advocate, to show people about the Haggadah, what's coming, before he painted over the swastikas. I found this lithograph. And this lithograph has the swastikas on it. On the far right, you're going to see the blow up of the snake with the swastikas. In your Haggadah and in any edition, you don't see him, because then he went after 35. When he got to England, I think that's when he painted the swastikas over. You don't see it. Heroism. Here you see an example of a warrior that are throughout Szyk's Haggadahs. And also you see a blue and white banner here. Again, keep in mind, this is part of the Great Hallel, painted, I'm not sure if 1934 or 35 when this one was painted, but during that 3-year period. Again, heroism. Here you'll find a quote here, which is said in the upper right-hand corner, which has been translated here. And also you'll see the scales of justice that appear throughout the Haggadah. All of this, by the way, in collaboration, and I've been greatly informed by many of the messages in the Haggadah because of Professor Sabar's research. So I'll always be eternally grateful, and those who follow the Haggadah will also be able to turn back to him and his wisdom for also pointing out a number of the comments that I'm making today. Of course, my job is to sort of string them together and tell the narrative of this, which this is part of. Also, in the beautiful cup of Elijah, heroism is a theme here. We think of the great beauty of Elijah visiting every family, but here for him, it's Ahab. He paints Elijah rebuking Ahab in the center of the cup, when we're not really thinking about this as a motif of how we see Elijah within the context of the Seder, but that's how Szyk saw him. And below that, again, Szyk repeats this theme throughout the Haggadah of blotting out Amalek from under the heavens, which appears at the very bottom of the cup. And then the concept of anti-Semitism, which is throughout, fighting anti-Semitism throughout the Haggadah. Here you'll see an image of, in each and every generation, there are those who stand against us to annihilate us. And Szyk, in this one illumination, is showing us all the many nations, or many of the nations, who throughout history rose up to annihilate the Jewish people throughout time. And some of the symbols you will see here. In the bottom right is or to the right is a blow up of this that may make it a little bit easier. Here you'll see ancient Rome symbolized by SPQR, the Senatus Populus, the Roman people. Rome. There's also here you'll see in the bottom right, Haman, Persia. You'll see here I'm going over here, the double-headed eagle, which is over here, which could be the pogroms of Russia. It could be, you'll see an Assyrian mask down here, possibly Assyria. Here you'll see the red and yellow symbols of the Spanish Inquisition, Castile and Leon. So Szyk is illuminating the text by showing us throughout history those who wanted to wipe out the Jews throughout the generations. Again, heroism is a very important part of Szyk's Haggadah, and two heroic figures are to Szyk, Moses and David. David, of course, what does he have to do with the Haggadah narrative? Moses has nothing, but Szyk puts him in, and I'll come to David in a second. But he also includes Moses, who is omitted, except from a small piyut from the Haggadah narrative itself. But Szyk wants to see him as more as a military figure than he does as a religious figure, and hence he paints him almost looking like a bodybuilder here in the center, with Aaron and Hur by his side, his brother and nephew, holding up his arms, because that's when the Israelites are victorious in battle against the Amalekites and so on. So Szyk sees this as an important element. He wants his own people to be heroic at the time in the mid-1930s. Similarly, he translates this to his political art during World War II. This is the modern Moses. But here, instead of Aaron, the man of peace, to his right, you'll see the armed Jewish soldier or the resistance fighter with a revolver in his vest. This was published by one of Peter Bergson's groups of the Emergency Committee to Save the Jewish People of Europe, where Szyk was an integral part of, together with Ben Hecht and with others, Ze'ev Jabotinsky, others who became part of the Bergson group. We don't have time to talk about his political art, political period, but it shows you how he transitions his art from biblical art to political art in terms of what's taking place in his own time. Here are images in the Haggadah of King David with the head of Goliath. Note over here, this is part of one of these is part of the Dayenu song. If David had taken off only the head of Goliath, that might have been enough. And here Goliath is shown with, again, blonde hair and blue eyes as the Aryan, as the German. The idea of Zionism, going off to the land of Israel, leaving Europe. I mean, look, this is the Haggadah. We're going to use this. This has these themes running through it at the time that this annihilation plan, projected plan, is in effect. And so here you'll see the grandfather or father blessing the children or the grandchildren as they go off to the land of Israel, being painted by Szyk in Ludge. Here you see a Star of David over here with Sion in the center, hard to see on your screen. But here you get a sense of that with his blessing, they're going ready to sow the land and cultivate it as part of the Haggadah narrative. And of course, the four sons are unique. Well, I think Shalom, Professor Sabar can certainly weigh in on this more about the four sons throughout history, but Szyk's portrayal here, where quite often we'll see as the wicked son military figure, Szyk sort of makes the other figures Polish in nature, the wise son, the one who simple, the one who doesn't know how to ask, but the wicked son looks very Germanesque. Initially, Szyk painted a swastika on this wicked son. It was cut out. A new image was painted and placed here in the 1930s by Szyk. If I showed you the reverse verso of this original work of art, and flipped it, you'd see that that was cut out. It's been repasted, and from the back, you can witness it. All of this information about the Haggadahs came to me by a man named Mr. Horowitz, whom I met, 20 years ago in Tel Aviv in his walk-up apartment. And his father had the cooperative that helped Szyk publish his Haggadah. And he was a little boy. He saw the swastikas. Then he told me they're there. That's how he knew to look for them. It's a long story made short. In any case, you see the Hitler-type mustache, the boots, the riding crop, the feathered hat, all of the things that contribute to this wicked son in Szyk's narrative. Finally, in my themes dedication page, which I'll get to. This isn't a dedication page, but I think an important lesson for us about Szyk's tie to the land of Israel and to Jerusalem itself. One of the first pages in the Haggadah happens to be this motif, and you'll see here that on the first page of the Haggadah, the very first words are, in Hebrew, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. The first word in the first page, the first sentence in the first page of his Haggadah, also the last page, the last words in his Haggadah are the same. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. From beginning to end, Jerusalem, Israel, the Jewish people are an integral part of his Haggadah. He concludes his Haggadah with the following words, and this will be my lead in to Professor Sabar. He concludes it with these words: I am but a Jew praying in art. If I have succeeded in any measure, if I've gained the power of reception among the elite of the world, I owe it all to the teachings, the traditions, and the eternal virtues of my people, Israel. And this is his Haggadah in brief. To introduce you to it, Professor Sabar, it's all yours. Or if Paul, you have any questions, we save for later. But try to.
Firstly, thank you so much for that amazing elucidation of the Haggadah from Szyk, and I think for our viewers, those of you who are able to come to the exhibition at the Begin Center where Irvin will be with us, give you a sense of how much we'll gain from his wisdom about Arthur Szyk at that exhibition. Put your questions into the Q&A. There'll be a chance to ask Irvin those questions. But I want to turn now to Professor Shalom Sabar. Thank you, Professor Sabar, for joining us. So your expertise is Jewish art history, Jewish folklore, and you're going to be talking about the Haggadah in the context of other historical Haggadot, and maybe you could also include for us this question as to what is it about the Haggadah in all the various Jewish religious or ritual items. What is it about the Haggadah that you think lends itself to art, to this kind of an attempt to why is it that it's to be made not just as a book to read every year, but also to be beautiful in a certain way?
Okay, thank you so much, Paul, and my dear friend Irvin. You don't know, but we know each other for 40 years now, since my student days in California. So it's a pleasure to be again together. This project was really lovely one, and you'll understand the second why. I'll show you the first edition of Arthur Szyk Haggadah that was in my home when I was a child, my parents, and I'll speak about it in a second. But to answer your question, Paul, I would say that the Haggadah is certainly the most illustrated Jewish book, more than any other manuscript or later printed books that we have. The Haggadah is the largest number of editions, of illustrated editions, whether by non-artists, unknown, manuscript illuminations, printed illuminations, woodcuts, etchings, and many other techniques. So why is that? Firstly, inside the synagogue where the holy books are, you cannot illuminate with figurative imagery the Torah scroll, of course, and not other books. That's not considered possible from rabbinical point of view, from halachic point of view, and many objected to that throughout the centuries. The Haggadah is read at home, is a ceremony that is conducted in the privacy of the family, with no one overlooking you and telling you what to do. And actually, the whole purpose of the Haggadah is to tell the story of the Jewish people, or the story of the Exodus, and to tell it to children. Yes, V'yigadet levincha, you tell it to the children, and many communities, as we know in the past, it wasn't enough to tell it in Hebrew or in Aramaic as the language of the Haggadah, but to translate it to the vernacular language, whether it's Judeo-Arabic or Judeo-Persian or Yiddish or Ladino or whatever, so that everyone understands the text of the Haggadah, including children and women. So the idea to illustrate this book and to show them how everything happened, especially when such a figure as Moses is not mentioned or hardly mentioned in the Haggadah, you can show what is missing by the illuminations. So really they do, let's say, compensate for the lack of story in the Haggadah, is just passages that are not really connected to each other. You can tell the story through the images, and that's what the artists try to do over the ages. So with these words of introduction, later I can elaborate on this and tell you about some important Haggadot. And let's go to the Szyk Haggadah. And I'm showing you this edition, as I said, that Irvin mentioned, that was printed in Israel in the 50s, 56. And this was, like a shock. I remember as a child when my father brought it for the first time. I was around 10 years old at that time. And we were used to these Haggadot that are made of, like a small Haggadot printed on paper in black and white, very dull, very not impressive, and not pleasant to handle and anything like that. And then comes this Haggadah that is, at that time, I didn't know medieval manuscripts, and it looks like something else, like so colorful, so rich. Some said at that time, I remember, this is the most beautiful Haggadah ever created. Today, I'm not sure I will say that, but I can maybe say the most beautiful Haggadah of the 20th century. I don't know. It depends on how you define this. But anyway, certainly one of the best, one of the most important Haggadot ever created. The artist you heard about him on Arthur Szyk, what I'll try to show you is how much is really continuing the tradition of Jewish art of the past, how much he's dependent on it, and how much he wants to improve and change it. All this is happening together in this book, and this is printed Haggadah, but it's the one that looks like manuscript more than anything else that was produced before. I mean, since the invention of printing, now you have parallel examples as well in our times. But when he printed it in 1940 in London, this was the first time. So you can look at the page on the left from his Haggadah, and on the right from the Barcelona Haggadah, a Spanish Haggadah of the Middle Ages of the 14th century. And you can see this idea of like designing the page, not only the text, but with images, how they correlate to each other, how they, let's say, what is missing in the text is added in the illustration, and together they make one, let's say, nice, pleasing to the eye, the combination of text and image. Some letters are illuminated, the words are written separately and beautifully with nekudot so that you can read them very clearly. There are illustrations all over and so on. And this is the same in the concept, let's say, of medieval Spanish Haggadah, the same idea. This page from Barcelona Haggadah, yes, you have, it's like a page that just tells you about what happens if the Seder falls on Motzei Shabbat, like we have this year. ואם חל להיות במוצאי שבת, אומר יין קידוש, נר הבדלה זמן. So it's halachic page, but it's illuminated with all these images, for example, making the Havdalah here. So you see the child is holding the candle, the father is holding the cup of wine, and the words are Yaknehaz is illuminated, the Im is illuminated with figures and so on, and the whole page is like celebration of beauty, and when you see the Seder, you won't fall asleep looking one page after the other that look like this, and each one is different. Another idea that Szyk took from medieval Haggadot that is very clearly is to have an initial word or initial letter. For example, here we see this opening for Sfor Hamatcha, for pour out your rage upon the nations that did not know you. And the letter Shin is written large in several medieval Haggadot, like this is the famous Darmstadt Haggadah from Germany. And you see the letter Shin, in imitation of the initial, of the initial letter in Latin manuscript of the Middle Ages. So you have the letter Shin, and then it continues, although you don't have that in Hebrew, you have an initial letter or a large letter, but it's done in the same way. So Shvoch is here, and Shvoch is here. And you can even compare the colors and the celebration of, again, the page, as I said, with this image of Szyk and how it looks in the Darmstadt Haggadah. Even the coloring is similar, red and blue and so on. I mean, yellow, these are the colors that are often used in this medieval Haggadot. I want to show you other features that Szyk took from the medieval Haggadot. We have the opening page of his Haggadah with the family at the Seder. This is, of course, an episode that you'll find in hundreds of Haggadot, showing the family at the Seder. And actually following that, you can learn a lot about how the Jews of the time in the place looked like and what food they ate at the Seder, how the charoset looked like, how the matzah, and so on and so forth. We won't go into this. Even for me, that is, I'm a student also of ritual art, you have the three-tiered Seder plate here and so on, other objects that we identify so much, or the lamp with the lions and so on, that we know from the time of Szyk in Eastern Europe. But the item that I want to call your attention to, this is the opening page of the Haggadah. And on the top, you have the emblem of the city of Lemberg, of Lviv. Because although Szyk was from Lodz, he planned to dedicate this Haggadah, or to make it, let's say, the Haggadah of Lviv. That's the title that actually he was thinking to give it, the Lviv Haggadah. So he put the emblem of the city that you see here at the top. Yes, it's a castle with a lion. I want to show you how it looks today. So here you have the emblem of the city of Lviv. Of course, the cross is illuminated here, yes. And you have this logo here, Semper Fidelis, also here, meaning always faithful. So that's an ancient symbol of Lviv, I think from the 12th or 13th century. It goes back to the Middle Ages. And that is used, and they put it as like homage to the city, like prayer for the government, as we said, Tfilah L'Shlomo Malchut. And this concept is very well known for medieval Haggadot. I'm showing the famous Sarajevo Haggadah in Sarajevo. It's a Spanish one, but it comes from Sarajevo. It comes from Barcelona originally. And so on the opening page with Halachmania, the beginning of the text that you read at the Seder. So you have this beautiful, amazing page. And I'm showing a detail here on the upper section. And here above the crenellated wall of a medieval castle, you see this emblem here, yes, emblem, that appears also on other Catalan Haggadot. All of them are from Catalonia. And we know they're from Catalonia because these Haggadot don't have colophon. They don't have text that tells us where they were produced, but they have the coat of arms of the king of the time, of the ruler, where the Jews were living. And the same coat of arms is a red stripes on gold background. And these are the emblems, the coat of arms, or the heraldic device of Catalonia that we can see until from the Middle Ages, from that time, especially it was the capital of Barcelona, but all of Catalonia was using this. And until today, you can see it with the football team of Barcelona, football, or Barca, it's called. This is in their emblem until today. Anyway, so we see where Szyk is getting his ideas, and actually the knowledge of medieval Spain appears elsewhere in the Haggadah, as we already saw a few minutes ago. I want to show this page now that we saw before of the enemies of the Jews in the past, that he's illuminating here in one pile of figures of images, as Irvin described that so beautifully, of the enemies of our enemies of the past. And he has the emblem of, that you see here, of Castile and Leon, as we heard. This is the castle for Castilia and the lion for Leon, the two kingdoms that were persecuted Jews, but also were in favor of them, depending on the period, not so easy to reply. But anyway, so Szyk is putting them in the same manner as they appear in medieval emblems. And this again was in use by medieval Jews. Again, I'm sure Szyk knew that it cannot be that it's not known. The synagogue of Don Shmuel Alevi Abulafia, who was the minister of treasury of the king of the time in the city of Toledo in Spain. And this is a synagogue that you can visit till today. It's one of the two synagogues that still are extant in Toledo. And here on the wall, just near the Torah Ark, there is this dedication with this shield, with the same emblem that we have in Szyk Haggadah, the castle and the lion. Let's move now to printed Haggadot, and I want to show you how when Szyk is also aware of the changes that were done in printed Haggadot. In medieval Haggadot, the 10 plagues were shown, each one separately. This first Haggadah that has all the 10 plagues on one page is this Haggadah printed in Venice in 1609. The so-called the Venice Haggadah, one of the most beautiful printed Haggadot. So you see how it's done. For each one, there is a small woodcut that shows the plague and how it was done. We're not going into the iconography to see how it is done. And in Szyk, we have the same, except here it's going from right to left, and he's going from top to bottom. Dams for the kinim and so on, 5 on each side. So it's the same composition. And even he's taking from the Venice Haggadah that you have the initial letter showing the image related to the blessing or to the text that is, here is the blessing for Biur Chametz, for burning the Chametz, and you see the letter Bet, Baruch, for Baruch Atah Adonai, and you see this old Jew who is holding the feather and the spoon to look for the crumbs of bread, and you have the same episode and the same concept in the Venice Haggadah. The letter Bet for Baruch and Biur Chametz. Szyk also had this wonderful idea that the Jews of the past were not only those who built the pyramids, they were not only good architects, but also the artists of ancient Egypt. So in this illustration that already we saw a few minutes ago, we see the slaves, the Jewish slaves, they are artists. Look what he's doing. If you didn't know that all these amazing paintings that we have in the pyramids were done by the Hebrews of ancient Egypt. He even imitated actual gods that the Jews were doing it for the Egyptians. We won't go who these gods are now, and so on, but these are the same figures that he was looking in archaeological book and imitated. But Szyk is not only looking at Jewish art, he's also very much influenced by what he loved most, I think, Renaissance and Baroque Italian art. So we can see that how much he's influenced by that in some of the images. For example, here is the finding of Moses with the daughter of Pharaoh here. And this is the sister of Moses. And they are now finding the basket that is here with baby Moses. Okay, so he could have looked at the medieval Haggadot, but in none of them we have this beautiful composition that we have in Szyk. In medieval Haggadot, this episode is very simple, although it has some midrashic elements, like this is the Nuremberg Haggadah, the second Nuremberg Haggadah of 15th century Germany, the same episode is the daughter of Pharaoh, and she is herself actually finding the basket, because according to the Midrash, Vatishlach Amata, it means not only that she has sent her servant maid, but also that her hand has become longer. And so that's what we'll see here, the longer hands. But it's very simple composition. And what was more influential to Szyk were, as I said, many images of this topic in Renaissance and Baroque Italy. I'm showing you just one by Orazio Gentileschi that shows the same episode. And you can compare the two and see the baby is raised by the servant maid here and given to the princess here and so on. I mean, he has this idea of making his art also, let's say, Renaissance-like. He's also influenced by Gustave Doré with this. I'm showing you now the episode from Gustave Doré of the same episode. And what is mostly, let's say, similar in both is the person behind the servant of the daughter of Pharaoh holding the parasol above her head. So he takes influences from high art as well, and so on and so forth. The Haggadah is very rich in all what I'm saying, so you have to go for these images to see that. Also, you won't believe it, but maybe I'm crazy to think about that. This is Maaseh Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva and the 5 sages sitting in Bnei Brak. So here we have the 5 of them on one side of the table, and one is central, and two others on each side, and they're discussing while he's so calm and in the center and not intervening with them. For me, it's the Last Supper of Leonardo. I don't think it's any other model that he could have used. You sit on one side of the table, and Jesus in the center, like Rabbi Akiva here. And actually, it's not only the composition of Leonardo that Szyk is using, but I think it's more than that. This is the Messiah of the Christians. Rabbi Akiva was the herald of the Messiah of the Second Temple period, Bar Kochva. So it takes to reason to make the composition in this way. Okay, I don't know if I have time. How much time I have? I don't know if I have time to speak.
A couple more minutes. Sure.
Okay, it's fine. Okay, so about the 4 sons, very briefly, because it's a big topic. And of course, the most interesting of the 4 sons is the Rasha, the wicked one, that looks like a Nazi, as we heard. So you should know that in medieval Haggadot, the Rasha was depicted as a soldier. But in Szyk Haggadah, the soldier is something else, as we'll see in a second. So the soldier was the one who was persecuting the Jews, whether in Germany, in Spain, or in Italy. So they depicted the Rasha as a soldier of the time, whatever he looks like, an Italian or German or Spanish soldier. Even in printed Haggadot, it continues like that. This is the Prague Haggadah, and it's a Bohemian soldier of the time for the Rasha. The change occurred only in the 19th century when the Jews for the first time volunteered or joined local armies. It happens first in Germany, that we have Jews joining the Prussian army. And here we have a painting by this Jewish artist of Frankfurt, Moritz Oppenheim, that shows a young Jewish man that has joined the Prussian wars of his time and is returning home on Shabbat. So you see him, I have a detail of that. You see him coming to his family that just finished to eat the cholent, and the challah is still on the table, and the cup of wine, and they all look at him in admiration. This is the first time that we have a Jew that is joining the army, and of course it's changing the view of the Jew. So there were, since then, let's say mid-19th century, the wicked son is not shown anymore as a soldier. There are different attempts. I forgot to bring you the slide of the Chicago Haggadah of 1894 that is shown as smoking a cigar. But Szyk does him as a Nazi, so it's very well. Szyk was also very much influenced by the shtetl and the life in Poland, Jewish traditional life in Poland, in many of the images. For example, here we have this page, the end of the Haggadah with Meshkachech Yerushalayim. And the composition of the page, again, I'm going maybe too detailed to Jewish art, but the composition of the page is like any Jewish paper cut of Poland. I mean, you have pairs of lions, symmetrical order, Gibor Kari, this typical paper cut. You have griffins, you have unicorns, you have all these kind of animals that appear in many of these paper cuts, and they appear in the synagogues. If you would go to any traditional synagogue in the 19th, early 20th centuries that was still extant in Poland, you'll see that. For example, here is one of these Torah arcs in the Druya synagogue, show you a detail. And so you have the top, the griffins like we have here, yes? I mean, these figures that are half lions, half birds, yes? So you have them. This was very typical of a Polish Jewish art, and he's using that throughout. So you can see he using old sources, new sources, what he grew up with, the the tradition of Jewish art and so on. I'll skip some. Okay. So these Jews of his time, the Polish Jews of his time, are a great suffering. He admits that. He shows that to us in many of the illustrations again. So you see them with the chants. Here they are all sad people and so on, walking nowhere. This is actually influenced by an artist called Shmuel Hirschenberg, that shows the Jews going nowhere. I mean, that time they did not have any hope. They're going here in the snow in this famous painting by Hirschenberg that is lost by now. And they're all old and they're all very tired and they have no destination, nowhere to go. There are many enemies, yes, we know around. Already Irvin spoke about that, I can skip it. But he has a solution Szyk for us, and the solution is the Jewish army, the Jewish soldiers. This is something that comes very much in Europe of the time. We have, not only in Europe, but also in Eretz Israel, of this, let's say that you have to fight to get freedom. Jews want to fight, Jews, this from Chicago, or this from Ken Betar, the Betar branch in Dieburg in Germany. Judah fell in blood and fire, Judah will rise again in blood and fire. This is the slogan of Betar, that Begin is also part of it, of course, and Szyk is now showing it to us in the Haggadah by showing those of the past who took revenge of our enemies. Moses hitting the Egyptian. Here, as we heard, Elijah with Amalek. Here is Shmuel slaughtering Agag. Yes, I mean, you have one after the other, David and Goliath. All these heroes of the past that took revenge of our enemies in the past. And finally, I'll go to the final things, is that of all these enemies, we will rise. We can raise a cup of wine and say the blessing, and the 10 Commandments will be supreme again, you can say. Above all these mischiefs and so on, we have a dream, it will be fulfilled, and this dream will be fulfilled in Eretz Israel, as we heard. So we see these people are not going nowhere. They go to Zion, and in this ship that is a military ship, but also can serve as the ship of salvation, of redemption, the Geula ship. So we come to the end here with these images that show them going to Zion. And look at this Zion written in Magen David. Those of you who live in Jerusalem, go to the neighborhoods where it was done at that time in the 1930s, like in Agrippa Street, 1933, you'll see exactly this emblem, Zion with the Magen David inside. So here's the solution of Szyk to all the troubles of the past, is building Zion and the Jewish nation and so on. So that's why this Haggadah, I think, has become so meaningful to so many at the time that it was produced in the middle of the Second World War. And so it became so influential and so popular, I think, in our time, or at least in the 50s and 60s and around that time. And in Israel, I just want to show you finally that it was so many times reproduced all over in so many contexts that are totally not related, because these images became so lovable, you can say, that everyone would use them. And it's like the ultimate Seder, the ultimate Passover, the ultimate way the Egyptians looked through this Haggadah of Arthur Szyk. Okay, Toda Rabba, I'll stop it.
Thank you so much, Professor Sabar. That was really, really amazing. So we have a little bit of time. I'm encouraging our audience to write questions in. Shmuel Yerushalmi had I think it's a statement, but I think it's also a question there as well, where he mentions, he says that you could also today have Haggadot that are created that are dedicated to contemporary political or historical social events. So I wanted to ask you, Shalom Sabar, if you're aware of any more recent Haggadot where the illustrator has sought to bring in contemporary issues into the Haggadah, and also whether prior to Arthur Szyk that was the case, whether there were earlier Haggadot where that was happening, or whether Arthur Szyk is really unique in that respect.
Okay, no, let me put it in this way. I think every Haggadah is reflecting its times. Every Haggadah has some statements, whether they are positive, negative, people are suffering or people are victorious. I mean, you have that in every Haggadah. I would claim that since the earliest one, especially the illustrations, because the text is more or less frozen. I mean, it's not frozen, but it's more frozen than the illustrations.
Yeah.
Every illustrated Haggadah is by a person who lived in Toledo, in Barcelona, or in Frankfurt or wherever, or in Morocco or wherever. They depict whatever they know. Like the Bertze Haggadah, the earliest illustrated Haggadah that we have in the Israel Museum from Germany, shows the sufferings of the Jews of the time, because the Jews of Germany suffered a lot. So it's not a Haggadah of victory, it's a Haggadah of how much is difficult to live in Germany of the time. So I think every Haggadah does it. And today, maybe the Szyk Haggadah is more emphatic about it because he has a program. He has the other Haggadah, they do it, by the way, because this is the reality they know. But Szyk has an agenda, you can say.
Yeah,
he wants to prove something, and he does it very wisely.
Thank you very much. Irvin Ungar, I wanted to ask you to expand a little from the Haggadah to the wider sort of Szyk universe. Are there other examples of where Szyk is using his art specifically in the context of Jewish ritual, where Jewish ritual or Jewish religious custom somehow is that is providing the opportunity for Szyk to use his art, or is the Haggadah quite unique in that respect?
No, I mean, Szyk quite often would take biblical books, and he would illustrate them, and they would have purpose. He illustrated the book of Esther. I'll get to this. First of all, he did a holiday series of all of the holidays. So he has Hanukkah and Rosh Hashanah and Simchat Torah. He illustrated a whole holiday series. But moving to some of the biblical books, for example, the Megillat Esther, the book of Esther, he illustrated twice. Once in 1925 in Paris. It was very almost like some might say Persian miniatures, but Esther, the beautiful queen, Esther, heroic. But he illustrated again in 1950, an entirely different style. But here became World War II was over. Szyk is very activist, and you'll see Haman hanging from the gallows with swastikas painted over them. This book was printed in Israel in 1974. This is 23 years after Szyk died, and you will see where there swastikas appear throughout the book. Also in the book of Job that Szyk illustrated from the Bible. Again, Job will appear. He paints the Sabaeans and the Chaldeans as Japanese and as Germans. If you look at the faces in this illustrated book of Job, which he began in actually in 1944, finished in 46. So he started it during the war. He also paints Job with a Star of David, making him a Jew. But nonetheless, you will see those swastikas you can't see, but there is one small swastika you can see in the book of Job that's present. So he would take political, religious books. He'd add a political element to them that was not uncommon. He illustrated Book of Ruth, but that's not as activist in nature. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but constantly he would go back to the Bible. He would go back to Jewish symbols, and they would be portrayed. We saw modern Moses. He also did the modern Maccabees. I mean, he just everything would have he would go to the past and give them renewed modern meaning.
Right. We had a question, Irvin, for you. One of our audience wanted you to expand on your reference to his relationship with the Bergson Group and Ben Hecht.
Yeah, he was very involved. Szyk worked for 7-8 years for the Bergson Group itself. Ben Hecht would illustrate the pamphlets, the throwaways, the posters, the ads for the New York. Ben Hecht would write the text for all of them, and Szyk would be the illustrator for those ads. Ben Hecht, in his autobiography, Child of a Century, devotes a couple pages to Arthur Szyk, where he actually refers to him as the one-man art department of the Irgun in America. That's how he saw him, that he gave his time, his energy. Ben Hecht writes about him that he was already an artist, a celebrated artist in the world. He needed no cause to elevate his own status, that their status was elevated by Szyk's presence. Yeah, I guess everyone knew him, from Samuel Merlin to everyone who was there running in the offices, whether they were in New York or Washington.
Maybe I should just for those on the Zoom who may be not so familiar with what we're talking about the Bergson group, the group in the United States who were pushing for America to take greater action to rescue Jews from Europe, and it was led by Hillel Koch under the pseudonym of Peter Bergson, and Ben Hecht, who I think was a Hollywood screenwriter who got very involved in this and was sort of a big name supporter of the Bergson group, and would write these articles in the New York Times and other places. And yours telling us that Arthur Szyk would actually illustrate these.
And he would illustrate, just a point, they stood in opposition to Stephen Wise and all the Zionist American.
Right. So there was a Jewish establishment that was very much in the sort of wanted to stay on good terms with FDR and didn't want to rock the boat. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Okay. I think that's it. But I wanted to. Did either of you have any closing comments or things that you wanted to add that you didn't have time to say in your presentations? It's fine if not.
This is for your audience and for Shalom. In 1980, a journalist writer named S.L. Schneiderman published a biography of Arthur Szyk in Yiddish, published in Israel in 1980, and in there he makes reference to two Orthodox rabbis whom Szyk would have seen regularly, who may have had an influence on educating Szyk, in addition to his visits to the Louvre, to the British Library, to visit and to see these illuminated manuscripts, according to Schneiderman, who knew Arthur Szyk when he had written. Well, he wrote it in 1980. Szyk died in 51, but he knew Szyk. He said that a rabbi named Rabbi Eliezer Gershon Friedenson may have had a great deal of daily contact with Szyk when he was creating and looking. And I've always wondered, who were the people who influenced him in his art? Where did he get his Jewish education and so on? I think we may have the answer that Schneiderman has sort of opened up to us, which would be interesting to know more about these figures and characters. Just wanted to contribute that, because where did he get all of his vast knowledge? How did he assimilate it all? And here, through the Haggadah, we have this window in which to look into Szyk's world from the context of both beauty and art, as well as emphasizing what Szyk always said: art is not my aim, it is my means.
Right. For the many social causes that he pushed, and especially the cause of the Jewish people and the Zionism. Okay, I want to thank Irvin Ungar and Professor Shalom Sabar very much for their time and for their immense wisdom and information that they've given us today. I want to again tell you about our exhibition here at the Begin Center, a special exhibition called Arthur Szyk, Man of Dialogue, which we're very proud to be hosting here at the Begin Center. I've put the link again in the chat. You can also email me. I've also written my email address. If you want more information about the exhibition, you can drop me an email. If you want to be on our mailing list for English events here at the center and you're not on the mailing list, then also drop me an email, paulg@begincenter.org.il. And it just remains for me to thank again Irvin Ungar, Professor Shalom Sabar, to wish them and to wish everyone a Chag Sameach, have a wonderful Pesach, and we will see you here at the Begin Center, either on Zoom or in person at our next event, and you can go to our website or email me for those details. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Chag Sameach.
Thanks so much.